So today we're going to teach you how to mount your cast onto your articulator. The first thing you're going to do is place your cast into a bowl of water. The plaster tends to stick better onto a wet cast than a dry cast. Next, you're going to take a white plastic mounting plate and grab a magnet and place the magnet into the appropriate hole. The magnet with mounting plate gets snapped onto the upper member of the articulator. So all you do is match up the holes and it should snap right into place. Next, you have a mounting jig, and again you line up the holes to the lower member of the articulator and that magnet should snap it into place as well. Take your wet maxillary cast and go ahead and index it against the mounting jig. It should seat fairly flush on all the teeth. Now you want to close your articulator and you just want to visualize the amount of space that you have between the cast and then the upper mounting plate. That's how much plaster you're going to want to put. And before you add the plaster, you want to verify that your pin is set to 0. So you're looking for the dark black mark and line that up to the top part of your articulator. So now we're going to mix up our plaster. This is a type 1 gypsum. We've put 63 milliliters of water into the bowl, and we're going to use 1 bag of the plaster. So you always want to put the water into the bowl first, then add powder to it. You tend to have less of the plaster clumped together when you do it that way. So water into the bowl first, then add your powder to that. You want to mix it up until you get a nice homogeneous mix. This will take a few minutes here until you get the right consistency. We're going to speed this up a little bit, but you want to get to a point where you have sort of a soft serve-like consistency. You don't want the plaster to be too runny, otherwise it's going to flow everywhere and it's going to run off of your cast. So when it's ready, we'll start to slowly pile on top of the cast, and you want to build it up to the height of the mounting plate. So when we had closed the top part of the articulator, we're able to visualize about how much we need to add. You want to add just a little bit above that height so some of the plaster goes up into the little grooves on the white mounting plate above. Now we're mixing a little bit more because we want a little stiffer mix, because we're going to put some plaster directly onto the white mounting plate so it gets into all the grooves and it locks it in. So the key is to wait for a stiffer consistency so that when you put it into the grooves, the plaster isn't running down onto the articulator, but it stays in that mounting plate. Go ahead and gently close, and now you want to wipe off any excess plaster that may have snuck off to the sides, and you want to clean off the plaster that is off the side of the mounting plate or the cast. And you wait and let that set. So it's important to keep your bowl nice and clean. So what you want to do is let the plaster come to a full set, then go ahead and squeeze your bowl, and the plaster will break off into all these little tiny pieces. You can take your spatula and just remove the remaining little flakes. Then you'll go to the sink and just run it under some water, and it should get most of that plaster off of the bowl and spatula. Just grab a wet piece of paper towel and then wipe the bowl clean, and it should be free of any plaster. So now that the first layer of plaster has come to a full set, you want to fill in the gaps with more plaster. So again, we'll mix 63 milliliters of water for 1 bag of the mounting plaster. And you want it to get to a homogeneous mix again. And this time you can wait a little bit longer before you start adding it into the gaps, because you want to have that material have some fullness or body to it so it doesn't slump and run down your cast. The important thing here is to not get any plaster on the teeth themselves. So you want to be real methodical as you add plaster into the gaps. You'll start on one end and just gently kind of lay that in there as you rotate the cast around. So again, if your plaster is too runny, it's going to run everywhere onto your teeth, onto the occluding portions or the biting surfaces of your teeth, which is going to be hard to clean off once it's set. So you want to be real methodical here. No reason to rush this part. So you can see the plaster has reached a little bit more thick consistency, so it's easier to manipulate and actually press the plaster into the gaps. So now you're just using the spatula to scrape off any of the excess. You want to lean it against the mounting plate and against the stone cast, so you get a nice clean junction there. Now we'll run this under a little bit of water, and again, it's important to pay attention to the teeth, and you don't want plaster to run on top of the teeth, otherwise it's going to affect your bite. So I'm just smoothing out the plaster under a little bit of water and just with some finger pressure and wiping away any of the excess. If you do this too early, you're going to ditch out some of the plaster. If you do this too late, then you're not going to be able to remove much of the plaster because it's too hard. So there's this kind of window that you have that you can quickly and smoothly remove and smooth the plaster. So this may take some practice and get the timing just right, but it's a quick and easy way to kind of beautify your cast. And again, inspect your teeth to make sure that you don't have any white plaster on top of it. So we'll let that come to a complete set after it goes through its exothermic reaction. The next step is to take your lower casts, and you want to, what they call, hand articulate the two casts together. So you're going to find the most stable position that the maxillary and mandibular casts will kind of lock into each other. Once you have that position, hold it in place while you tie a piece of this rubber band on top of the top part of the articulator and on the bottom side of the mandibular cast. So this serves to hold the maxillary and mandibular casts stable against each other as you add plaster. And once again, you want to check that the pin is set to 0 if you hadn't done that previously. So at this point, you want to add plaster to the bottom, the mandibular cast, and it's helpful to lean the lower part of the articulator against the wall, or have a classmate help you hold it in place, otherwise it'll tip. So just like we did the maxillary cast, you're going to mix up your plaster. This is a type 1 gypsum again, 63 milliliters of water for one package of powder. And again, you're going to put the water in first, then add powder to the water. You want a homogeneous mix, a soft serve-like consistency. You want to add it just to the center of the cast, and you want to build it up to a height that it just touches the mounting plate. You want to wait for the plaster to get a little bit more firm before you start putting the plaster into the grooves of the mounting plate. Otherwise, gravity is going to take that plaster and it'll get all over your articulator in areas where you don't want it. So now we're waiting for it to get to a little thicker consistency. We're doing a little extra mixing. At this point, I want to put the plaster into the grooves of the mounting plate. Close the articulator down, and again, wipe off any excess that may be sticking out beyond the mounting plate or beyond the cast. So as that's setting, what you want to do is take your big blue bands and you want to hold the upper and the lower parts of the articulator tightly together. So remember that the plaster expands, and you want to prevent any expansion of that by holding it firmly with that rubber band in place. Now we'll repeat the process of filling in the gaps with the lower. You want to snip off the rubber bands. You don't want any of that rubber band to be sticking out beyond your cast. So you take some scissors and snip that off. And just like you did before, 63 mils of water, 1 packet of the mounting plaster, water first, then powder. You want a homogeneous mix. And it's helpful to wet the cast before you add the second layer of plaster. And again, real methodically, you'll put it in. You don't want it too runny, otherwise it'll flow everywhere. And you slowly put it on, and you wait for it to get to a thicker mix or consistency, and then you can slowly start to press the plaster into place and start to remove the excess. So you just lean the spatula against the mounting plate and against the cast. Take the water and just gently smooth that out. Once again, be careful not to get any of the plaster on to the tooth portion of your cast. We want to be able to preserve all of that without having any extra plaster on top. So once that's smoothed out, you'll let that set. It'll go through its exothermic reaction. And again, this plaster will expand just a little bit. After it's set, you want to start to sand and smooth the plaster and the stone off. So with just a little bit of water, you just can wet the sandpaper. You don't need to have the cast running under the water, or have the water running under on the cast. So you just go through and you'll use your fine sandpaper and smooth that out until it's got a nice smooth finish. And you repeat that process for the maxillary and mandibular casts, and you have your finished product.